On today's episode, we're going to dive deep into the world of esports. In 2024, the global esports market was valued at over $1.4 billion, with projections to hit $1.9 billion by 2027. It's a thriving industry with massive audiences, with over 500 million esports enthusiasts worldwide. So if you've ever wondered how esports went from underground tournaments to primetime viewing, stick around, we're going to unpack it all.
This is the Point and Click podcast with your host, Mark Yafchak.
Welcome to the podcast. Syracuse University is offering a curriculum to develop the future of esports through academic programs, competitive opportunities, and best-in-class esports facilities. Students get hands-on experience to develop skills to work in esports that also transfer to other industries. I'm very excited to welcome Gawrysiak. He is the Executive Director of Esports at Syracuse University. I've been looking forward to talking about this topic. I've been following it for probably the last 10 years. A colleague of mine who works for Hearst Television mentioned it to me over pizza one day, and he said, you really have to take a look into this esports thing. And I had no idea what he was talking about. So maybe you could help our listeners understand what are esports, or what is esport, and how did you get involved with it?
Geez, all right, starting off strong here. No, I'll try to not give the professor answer that I typically give, because I spend literally three lessons during my class about explaining just trying to define what esports is. So esports is, really simply put, competitive video games, right? And so you got a video game, you're playing against somebody else, you got a winner, you got a loser, you got a higher score, whatever that might be. That is what esports is. It is really just, in the most simplest form, competitive video games. Now, of course, what we see these days is very structured, organized competition with teams that are playing very certain games on like a stage or in a tournament. Maybe there's a trophy, maybe there's a prize pool, whatever that might look like. So esports obviously takes many forms and fashions. And it also is a lot of different games, right? So the term esports isn't like, oh, it's just playing this one particular game, right? It refers to any kind of competitive video game, kind of like an umbrella term that might be an equivalent in traditional sports like track and field, or like stick and ball sports, things like that, where under track and field, you have, javelin, you have shot put, you have a lot of different kind of events. Esports has a lot of different game titles that can be competed in, from League of Legends to Overwatch to Call of Duty and so on. So yeah, esports, really generically, competitive video games. It's something that's quickly evolving and becoming bigger around the world, around the country, at a lot of different levels, whether it is that professional level, recreational level, but also the collegiate level, which is what we'll talk about more today. And I really got started because I played video games. I'm a product of the 90s, which was what I consider the heyday of video games, with the Super Nintendo, the N64, and then you get into the Xbox right there towards the end of that decade. And I played a lot of games kind of growing up, and the typical case, parents are, what are you going to do with this? Is this going to ever lead to anything? I was like, well, I don't know, but I'm having fun doing it. I'm also playing sports, and I'm getting an education and that stuff.
Making some money at it, hopefully.
Yeah, well, I wasn't making any money. I was definitely not good enough. I competed in Halo when I was in college. So this is like back in 2002, 3, and 4, around that era. And this is before kind of that official esports kickoff. But we had seen some things with like Quake and Quake tournaments and Thresh with Dennis Fong. He was very popular. But I competed, and I just kind of evolved into the space where I was doing research in video games related to sport and sport management, which is my background and what my PhD is in. And I figured if I got to do research for a living, I might as well make it something I'm interested in. And so baseball and video games were what I was interested in. So I was doing research on baseball video games and the evolution of those games from RBI baseball to MLB The Show, and what that impact on fan avidity is. And so that was just really the evolution of video games and sport, which were my two passions. Competed a little bit, but was studying traditional sport, now doing some research in video games. And that led to my first job, which was teaching sport management. But I would still incorporate some video game and these esports elements into the teaching and curriculum. And then eventually, when esports really started picking up around 2014, I was like, hey, let's start a varsity team at my previous institution. Let's look at a facility and what we can develop to offer students an opportunity that we didn't have growing up, which was competing for like a structured, organized college team. But we're starting to see that come to fruition in the mid-2010s to really give that opportunity. So I want to be on that, want to jump on it because of my former passions, and kind of reignited that. And I kept following that rabbit trail, led down the hole of developing curriculum, teaching classes, starting varsity competitive teams at a couple institutions, developing facilities, finding professional development as the scene continues to evolve. So really serendipitous in a lot of ways, but my origin story is just that I was a kid that played a lot of video games and liked sports growing up. That's really all. That's what it boils down to, really.
I know there's been a lot of growth in esports over the last few years, and I'm noticing a lot of colleges, specifically Syracuse University, are starting esports programs. What do you think is contributing to this heightened level of interest?
There can be a lot of reasons. Like when a lot of smaller schools were really getting into esports and having esports programs, this was about 4 or 5 years ago. And well, let's say it was before the pandemic. So before the pandemic, a lot of schools kind of saw these reports that were out about this academic cliff that was going to happen in 2025, where there was a birth deficit and there weren't as many students that were going to college. And so like, well, how do we get future learners to come to an institution of higher education? What's going to attract them to come to school? Whereas they can't just go on YouTube or Google or something like that and learn the skills that are very vocational and practical, which is great. And that's awesome. But what's going to keep them coming to school to get that higher education, get that degree, to help propel them not just into a career, but as a person and develop as a person, develop those social skills, soft skills, develop that network. That's important, that all that goes into what a collegiate experience can bring you, instead of just learning something online and then applying that to a career. Again, nothing wrong with that, but higher education was exploring ways to really bring in that next generation of learners. And so esports and video games, clearly something that generations were doing, playing, engaged with, paying attention to. So how do we kind of capitalize on that and use esports and video games as an educational opportunity that didn't previously exist? Whether you have it competitively for the students that maybe didn't win the genetic lottery and couldn't play basketball or football or baseball, lacrosse, hockey, whatever it might be, but they were really more in tune with playing video games at a high level and were very good at playing video games. And that's where their passion was and where their community was. So a lot of schools saw esports as that way to engage that future generation of learner, to bring them to a college campus, to get an education, but also to retain them on a college campus, which is just as important, if not more so, than recruiting them to a campus, is how do you keep them there to get that degree? So that was really, in a lot of ways, what a lot of schools were looking at and why they started esports programs. Schools like Syracuse, we're not as concerned about recruitment retention, right, as maybe some small private liberal arts schools. But what Syracuse is embracing is this idea of innovation, this idea of meeting learners where they are. How do we provide something that we see is important to a lot of students out there, a lot of learners out there, and to still use it as that chance to get a higher education degree? But also, how do we just meet this current generation? How do we stay on top of where we see innovation going? Everything from, microchip processing and AI technology, but also looking at esports and video games and what that impact can be for our generation of learners that we have on campus and that next generation. So it's just a new way that we can engage learners in a way that we haven't before. It's a way of showing that we are embracing technology, that we aren't just stuck in very traditional academic disciplines, which are great, and you have to embrace those, but you can't be stuck in those. You have to innovate and evolve along with the times to make sure you're keeping up with what's going on in the workforce, what's going on around the world, what's going on with the change in technology and career aspirations, what's going on with culture around the world. And so video games is one of those mechanisms, along with a number of other areas that Syracuse and other big schools are starting to embrace in a way that's very intentional and very supportive of kind of this new idea. Kind of scary to a lot of people, but Syracuse is really known to be innovative and on top of things. So it's not as scary here as it might be at a school like Harvard or Duke or UVA or something like that, that really embraces that tradition and it works for them. But we want to embrace that idea of innovation while still recognizing and supporting tradition at the same time, which is a really hard thing to kind of balance. But I think Syracuse does a great job of it.
Yeah. You've touched on the kind of challenges that esports competitors might face in their careers. Can you talk a little bit about what are maybe some of the biggest challenges they face? And maybe as an aside to that, what may be the most common misconceptions about esports, maybe players and coaching in general?
Yeah, some of the challenges are the legitimization of the space, right? It's almost like esports players have to kind of defend and prove that they should be taken seriously, that this is a viable career opportunity to be a professional esports player. That being said, it is really hard to be a professional esports player. It's like saying going to be a pro football player. That's really hard to do. That's a very small percentage of the population that engages with football has that opportunity to make a job of it, especially a career of it, which is different than a job, right? There are very few Tom Brady's out there that play until they're 78 or whatever he is these days, right? The average career span's 3 to 3.5 years for a football player. Esports players are kind of the same thing, right? It's if you make it to be a pro gamer, you're going to, number one, do it at a much younger age because you're probably going pro, quote unquote, at around 16, 17, 18 years old. And then you're probably skipping college to really put in the hours, put in the practice, go to travel to tournaments, compete, but also create content. And you're probably going to retire by 24, 25, 26 years old because your skills have diminished so much and you're so much slower compared to those 16, 17, and 18-year-olds. So some of the challenges of being a pro player are just, number one, making it to the top, making a career out of it, especially making it a career that lasts longer than 4 or 5 years, that pays you the salary that you should be fairly compensated for. The salaries are not NFL salaries. They're not Major League Baseball salaries, which are crazy these days, by the way. But in professional gaming, they're certainly not to that standard. They're still lucrative. You're getting 6 and maybe 7 figures for some of the top players, but you're not getting 8 or 9 figures, maybe 10 eventually, that we're getting into these days with traditional sports. So I think legitimizing the space, continuing to show that this is a career opportunity, but also I think for esports minded people, it's not just about playing, it's about working in that industry. What are those jobs outside of playing? Being a coach or a team manager or social media marketing, event organizer, working event operations, hospitality for these professional esports organizations. I think everybody's just kind of been fighting this uphill battle as them against the world. Like so many people think it's them against the world in a lot of capacities, to just defend what they're doing, show that it's legitimate, that there are viable career opportunities in this, not just playing, but working in the ecosystem. So those are the kind of the ideas we're trying to dispel, is that esports and video games is not just about playing esports and video games. It's about being involved in so much more than that and embracing the skills that come through being involved with that. The traditional soft skills of communication, teamwork, communication, time management that we've instilled in people that play football or baseball or basketball in higher education or in high school. We always say it's not about being a pro athlete. It's about getting skills that will transition to other areas. The same thing is absolutely true in esports, and people don't realize that yet. There's just a level of ignorance around what esports can offer and what video games can offer, and that's fine. But let's find a way to get that education to people so they can understand where the true value can be and where the healthy gaming habits are, that it's not somebody isolated in their parents' basement, eating Cheetos, drinking Mountain Dew, eating pizza with really unhealthy, isolated experiences. It is very much a large community in-person experience, developing skills that absolutely transition and are still valued by our society as well as the global society. And it's breaking down those myths is going to take time, as any breaking down myths or stereotypes do, but it's continuing to show the success stories and opportunities that esports and gaming offers beyond those stereotypes.
Yeah, if you hadn't mentioned the term esports or video games and maybe just talked in those terms, I would think you were referring to any physical sports athlete, really.
Sure.
Let's talk a little bit about the kind of games that esport athletes are playing and why are these games chosen? Maybe the competitive nature of the game, or is it the skill set that they bring to the competition? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. At the collegiate level, it differs a little than the high school level. The collegiate level maybe mirrors the pro level closer. But I'll tell you that some of the top kind of esports titles right now around the world, the game League of Legends is still the most popular. It has the largest events, some of the biggest prize pools, the best organized tournaments, some of the biggest names in esports professionally. That continues to be a very, very popular game. In the collegiate level, that's probably a number 3 or 4 game title as far as popularity. It's a really hard game to be introduced and try to ramp up into if you haven't played it for years and years and years ahead of time. So the onboarding is really tough on that one. For us here at Syracuse, we compete in 6 different varsity titles. League of Legends is a club title, so not one of our varsity titles. But as far as our varsity titles, that we have university support for travel, for warm-up kits, for jerseys, for coaches, and scholarships. We compete in Rocket League, Smash Brothers Ultimate, Valorant, Call of Duty, Counter-Strike 2, and Overwatch 2. So those are the 6 titles that we currently have. Some of those are first-person shooters. Some of them are more strategy games. Some of them are fighting games. Rocket League is Rocket League. Doesn't really fit a genre necessarily. It's 3-on-3 soccer with cars. And so those are the most popular titles, the ones that we support here. They also mirror the most popular ones in colleges around the country. Right now, Rocket League and Valorant are the 2 most popular on college campuses, followed by probably Smash Brothers and then League of Legends kind of down there a little bit. So we always look at what the scene looks like around the country for what other games are popular, because you want to make sure you have a large number of schools competing so you can set up intentional competition. If only 7 or 8 other schools have teams, probably not going to have a lot of success finding good competition that's really good for your players. They can travel to tournaments, not a lot of publisher support. So what's popular around the country? What are other schools playing? What's popular on campus? We found that League of Legends wasn't that popular on our campus that we knew of anyway, which was strange. But every campus is going to have a different culture and value different things. So we're not going to force a game on our students to play. I tried that once. It was horrible. So we're not going to try to force students to play certain game titles just because they're popular around the country or because there's publisher support. We're going to embrace kind of what they have and what their interests are. And then we always look at what the new titles are. So right now, Marvel Rivals is a very popular game. It's kind of in its honeymoon phase. A lot of people are playing that on college campuses. We're keeping an eye on it. If we have a club that wants to start, they can try it. But we need to see that commitment to really treat this as a varsity activity before we support it with university funding. But if they want to go organize themselves and fund themselves for competition and travel, great, go do it. We would love that. We'll throw you out there on social media and let you use our facilities when we have them available. But as far as varsity support, we need commitment from the students to show up when they need to show up, to practice when they need to practice, to schedule their classes around when their matches are, when their travel is. We treat it just like we would football and basketball at the university. It's just not under athletics. So really those game titles comes down to student interest, national interest, and what publishers are supporting the collegiate scene. That really helps us understand what we're going to offer here for our titles.
Yeah. You know, there are on-site and remote competitions in esport. How do you prepare for either of those venues? And you mentioned that they may have to travel to another school. Maybe talk about the challenges of travel to these events and what goes into the preparation for that.
Yeah, so I would say at the collegiate level right now, about 95% of competition is online. Right, that's just the nature of where we are, and you can do it, which is great. That also helped during COVID that you could play online. And so the beauty of that is that we can avoid the number one expense for any college athletics, which is travel, right? And so we avoid a huge chunk of that money that we can just do and compete from our home institution. So what goes into that is that you have to have policies around making sure that your team and your competitors are playing on site from their home institution to try to have that level of competitive integrity. Right, to try to understand who is actually logging in and playing against you. And so there's a lot of trust that goes into that other directors and coaches at other schools are kind of advocating and having their students play who is eligible to play, a full-time student, GPA requirements, and is playing from their home site institution, not playing online from somewhere else in the world or from like a dorm room or anything like that, where you don't know what that software is, you don't know what's going on and who they actually are. So there's a lot of competitive integrity issues and trust that goes into the online nature of it. But it's also making sure your players understand what online play is like, that you're not actually sitting across from or next to your competitors, but you're still playing from a stage area that you might have 15, 20, 30 people watching you play against nobody else on stage, but they're watching you play online. And I think that's kind of embedded in the nature of what esports is. As kids are playing this growing up, they understand what online play is like. So there's really nothing out of the ordinary for them to play online, play remotely against other teams, because that is very much the norm and natural to a lot of these players by the time they get to college. So not a lot of training really goes into that, more so than make sure you're talking to them on chat, make sure you're being appropriate on chat, make sure that you are playing from the home institution, those kind of things. The harder one is the in-person competition, because that is out of the norm, which is the opposite for almost everything else we do in life. So getting them to understand what it's like to compete on a stage with brighter lights on them, with a brighter background behind them from some kind of video boards or video screens, adjusting to crowd noise or speaker noise that's going on. And so having not just a headset on, but having inner ear modules that pump in white noise as well to drown out sound, to make sure they still hear things clearly, to make sure communication is working and their microphones are okay. So competing in person is a very different experience for them, and something that a lot of students don't have that experience until they get to college. So we only travel to, the goal is at least one in-person competition per team per year. We always aim for more, but it just comes down to what's available, what's being offered, where it's being offered, when it's being offered. But we are getting ready to take 4 of our teams to go to Las Vegas to compete in their conference championships in April against 7 other Division I schools that also we've been competing against all year online. That will be the first time being in person against all these schools in Las Vegas. And so we're already talking to them about, here's the equipment you'll be competing on. Here's what the environment looks like. Here's what the sound looks like. Here's the schedule, because you might be playing in the morning, might be playing late at night. And a lot of them are only used to playing at night on our stage. So more the preparation is, what does that in-person look like? What does the equipment look like that they'll be competing on? When is it going to be happening? And what to expect out of that kind of environment versus just playing online.
Yeah. A lot of students aren't prepared to come to venues like the JMA Wireless Dome. I mean, they had to be prepared to be in a facility that's very loud. You might not be able to hear the other players making calls to you. You have to learn how to adapt to that environment. You mentioned to me about going from an isolated, maybe controlled environment into the lights with a lot of distraction. How do they stay focused? How does coaching even work in an esport environment? Are they off to the side waiting to jump in to give strategic support, or maybe just having an overview of what's going on in the competition and making tweaks here and there? How exactly does that work?
All of those. In a lot of ways, it is similar. And I coached baseball and football for a couple of years in Georgia before, getting into this esports thing. And I don't coach esports, because if I did, we'd be horrible. Unless we're playing Halo 1 or maybe GoldenEye on the N64. It's about the only thing I could coach these days. I tried it for a month, and I'm terrible at coaching. So I'm glad we got to hire people that are much better at coaching. But Mark, it is similar to traditional sports that you do have a person dedicated to a team that is in charge of their overall strategy. And what that consists of is a lot of video review, what we call VOD review, video on demand, where they get recordings of their matches. They'll break down what they did. We actually have interactive displays that we will pull up our video. We'll pause it, circle things on maps or on a screen to show players what we should have done, where they should have rotated, how they should have engaged or not engaged instead of what they did that could have given them an advantage. So we do video review of our matches. We do scout other teams. We'll take footage from their matches, show them what their tendencies are, who we expect them to choose as far as characters and strategies they have in that match, so that we can kind of counter plan for it. And then if they counter plan for us, how we counter plan that. You do that in football and in basketball and every other sport the same way. That you scout teams, you review your own footage, you talk about your overall strategy that you have as a team, but also you just scrimmage. So there's not a lot of drills that you might see in high school sports or middle school sports or rec sports or even college, where you run certain drills to work on things. That is very limited in esports. There's some of it that happens, like aim trainers and things like that. But most of the practice consists of scrimmages against other schools, because you want to get scrimmages, get real-time reps, because you want to take that footage and review it. So it's a lot of that versus skills and drills that you have. And so that's what the coaching looks like. As far as during matches, coaches are taking notes. Most organizers don't allow coaches to interact with players while they're playing. They're not in the same communication channel, so they're not able to talk to players in real time about what's going on. It's too easy to kind of get information that players shouldn't have during an esports event if they're able to see a neutral perspective about map placement or rotations, things like that. So coaches are not allowed to talk with players during matches, but they certainly can between rounds, right? Or between maps. So players might leave the stage, go to an isolating room, have some strategy talks, and come back out and have that competition. So that's what we're working on, is what is that evolution of coaching? When is it appropriate to talk? When is it not appropriate to talk? What are the skills they look for? What's going to give them that strategic advantage? But in a lot of ways, mentally, it does mirror traditional sports too.
Yeah. Now, how do you go about recruiting, maybe evaluating your team's composition? What do you look for? What strategies do you implement when you're considering players for your esport teams?
Yeah, recruitment, just like any sport, is an inexact science. I think it's even way more inexact in esports recruiting, because there's not this ranking system, a 5-star prospect, 4-star you're not going to get those kind of prospect rankings necessarily. There's a couple of online platforms that have a database of high school players from around the country that play on their platform. And you might have a standings. You'll know an in-game rank that a player might have, whether it's, platinum level or radiant level or whatever the different levels are for different games. They're all called something different, which is massively confusing. But you'll have in-game ranking systems, which is one indicator of how good they are, but certainly not the end-all be-all. So really what you do is you look at these leaderboards, you say, all right, this person's really highly ranked. I'd like to go see them in person, see how they actually play in an in-person event versus an online event. But what you listen for is communication, right? A lot of what coaches listen for is, how do they communicate with their teammates about the action on the screen? And you ask them, hey, have you ever been formally coached, or are you just kind of, your mechanical ability is almost innate and self-taught? Because then if you've got somebody that's at a good level, not a great level, that has never had formal coaching, they've got a lot of upside, right? That ceiling is much, much higher than somebody that's maybe had formal coaching for years and is still maybe at that same level. You're like, they might be kind of tapped out about how high their rank can go. They might have a much higher floor, but they have a lower ceiling. So it's having a conversation with these players about what that training has been like, what kind of competitions they've been in, scouring the national leaderboards with some different organizations about, who they have on their leaderboards and if they have in-person combines or showcases you can travel to. But also, like for us, we're going to start hosting high school events. We want high schoolers coming to campus so that we can evaluate their talent. We can also show off our really cool facilities and do some kind of passive recruiting where I don't need to say a word. They walk in our facilities, they're sold on the program here. So the recruiting is tough. Going to events, talking to people online, talking to coaches, but also having our current players tell us who they play with and who they know. Our players know the scenes better than we know the scenes. So believing in who our players are that we currently have, listening to who they think would be a good person to try to recruit to bring in, and then going through that process of talking to them, evaluating them. Are they admissible to the university? Do they qualify for financial aid? Evaluating if we can, if we're attaching esports scholarships on top of financial aid, merit-based, need-based aid, and then seeing if we can get them in and what their major is going to be. They've got to be a student first before being a competitor. So it's making sure they can be successful at Syracuse as well.
Now, what advice would you give someone looking to break into competitive esports? I mean, it sounds like being exposed to those environments is a good first step. Is there anything else you would recommend?
Do your work, or do your homework, right? Know what colleges have opportunities, right? Not every college has what Syracuse has to offer. Not every college has what Maryville, one of the best competitive schools in the country, if not the best, has to offer. Students in high school need to know what colleges have to offer. Is it an esports competitive program? Is there great facilities? What teams do they offer? Is it an official varsity sport or is it just a club sport? What kind of academic programs do they have? Is it like Syracuse where they have an esports academic program? It's like, oh, cool. I love esports. I love the ecosystem. I want to learn more about the business and the media behind what goes into the esports industry. It's a lot of ways what sport management was back in the 70s and 80s. People like their football teams or basketball teams, but they can also study sport at the same time. Great. That's a good combo. And so it's for students in high school looking to do that. They need to know what schools exist. They need to know what opportunities are available and then join these national organizations. Go travel to these in-person showcases that they know colleges will be recruiting at. Reaching out to directors through Discord. Discord is an online platform for communication that is universally used in the gaming community. So reaching out to other coaches, directors, players about how to get on the radar. So a lot of times it's a little backwards that it's not recruiters reaching out first. It has to be players reaching out to recruiters to say they're interested and then having that conversation. So that's why it's such an inexact science. But for those that want to compete in college, play in college, do your homework, know what's available, know where it's available, and then start reaching out to people through Discord, through emails, or through word of mouth with players on those teams.
Yeah. I watch Twitch streamers with my daughter, and one of the players we watch regularly is Queso.
Yeah.
You've probably heard about him. He just recently won the Twitch Gamer of the Year award, and it's amazing to me that we can watch a gamer playing on a stream for say 3 or 4 hours, and it doesn't feel like 3 or 4 hours. I mean, how important is it for platforms like Twitch and YouTube to grow esports?
Everything. They're everything. Without them, esports doesn't exist, right? It's just like saying how important is ESPN to growing football, right? It's everything, right? It's there. I mean, yes, it will exist on such a smaller scale, but in order to get the word out about how important this is, the impact it can have, the skill of these players, Twitch and YouTube are right now by far the end all be all when it comes to media production and in esports and gaming. And you talk about Queso. Queso is fantastic, big advocate for the space. Wildly entertaining. Queso is one of one, right? He's very individualistic. He is one of a kind for sure. But the idea is, Mark, is that it's entertainment, right? It's not about video games, esports, sports. It's entertainment. Queso's entertaining. So it's about watching and doing and engaging with things that are entertaining to you as a person. And video games are incredibly entertaining to the vast majority of people around, certainly around the U.S., but around most countries in the world. That's how we get our entertainment, whether it's playing them or watching them, right? And so, yeah, it doesn't feel like 3 or 4 hours sometimes. It's a lot of fun. Tim the Tapman, another great one. He's from the Syracuse area.
I mean, it's really incredible, the strategizing in esport, the communication amongst players over their headsets in real time. I mean, it's evolving right before your eyes. You don't know what's going to happen next. I think that's what's engaging. Anything can happen. And yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
don't want to spend too much time on the business side of esports, but a lot of teams have sponsorships. I mean, what is the key to successful partnerships when it comes to esport?
Yeah, I think the key is understanding what the goals are of each organization. So when we're talking to people to work with, we want to make sure that we're on the same path of what is our vision, what is our values, what is our mission, why do we exist, and who are we trying to impact. And for us, we got to make sure we're impacting learners. What is that student experience like? How do we impact them in a really positive way to provide them something that's valuable for them moving forward, whether it's esports and gaming related or not, right? But how do we kind of align on that mission, vision, values? That to me is the number one thing that we look for. Any successful partnership is going to align, but it's also going to be a symbiotic relationship where both sides can benefit, right? It can't be a one-way transaction. That's what a sponsorship is. And if somebody wants to give us millions of dollars and then kind of leave us alone, I'm not going to ever turn down millions of dollars. But and maybe I get in trouble for saying this, I'm more interested in that long-term relationship than that one-time transaction, right? And so what is going to benefit the program? What is going to benefit the learners that we have? But then how can we help the people we're working with? How do we help them grow? How do we help them benefit from what we can offer them? And what we can offer is a new audience that is really, really hard to reach. Reaching this current generation of 18 to 21-year-olds is really hard to reach. So how do you reach them? Through video games, through streaming, through Twitch, through YouTube. That's how you reach an audience. So how do we get their product or that brand in front of these people? But making sure that that's a brand we want to be associated with. So we want to work locally with organizations here to make sure we're reaching kind of, yes, this local Syracuse area, central New York, but also Northeast region. We want to make sure that we're working with companies that want to advance what the esports ecosystem is. We have a great partnership with one of the top esports organizations in the world called Gen G, based out of South Korea. They have an LA office. They have a China office. They're building some sites in Saudi Arabia as well. So they have that global perspective. And guess what? That's something that's really important to Syracuse, is having global understanding and a global perspective. And they want to advance education and workforce development. All right, that sounds like it's right up our alley too. So again, Mark, it comes down to how do both sides grow together? How do both sides exist in the symbiotic relationship? What is a win for them? What is a win for us? And how do we get to a yes and make that happen without there being any kind of pitfalls or downsides to it? And then it's growing together. You don't have to start big with 7 or 8 figure deals. You can start with a 4-figure deal or a 5-figure deal or no money and just have time and talent that you're switching back and forth to make sure you're growing together, and let that relationship just breathe and evolve as you go. So it's about finding the people that want to grow with you, want to work together, that have the similar mission and values, and just making sure that, again, you're benefiting learners as best you can.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about the past and the present of esport. I mean, what do you see in the future of esports? I mean, how can esport be more inclusive to grow its base?
Jeez, yeah, it's tough. I think it's hard. And if I knew the answer, I could probably make a whole lot of money. Because that's what everybody's searching for, that golden goose. Like, what is that? What is going to get us to the next level? What's going to make esports and video games more accessible, more inclusive, more diversity within it, and diversity in all sense of the word diversity. How do we get, it really comes down to how do we get the mass amount of people involved and paying attention to esports, right? Because right now esports, video games, just so you know, video games is about 45% of the video game industry is women participation, right? So there's a ton of women that engage in video games. And sure, a lot of it, oh my gosh, I don't even know, my phone's over here. My phone's right there. I couldn't even find it. And I was freaked out for a second. But a lot of it is a mobile gaming, right? Mobile gaming really makes things more accessible for the average consumer, right? So I think advances in technology make these expensive computers and consoles and VR headsets, not cameras, but phones more accessible for the average fan to start engaging and playing video games. So I think as we continue to make it more accessible, bring that cost down, that will help. I think celebrating more diverse populations outside of the white male competitive player or the white or the Asian male competitive player, those are the two kind of classifications that dominate the competitive space. How do we make women feel more included in that space? How do we make more Latinos feel more included in that space? How do we find opportunities for them to have the same chances that other people see in the space? So we got to find people that look like them, that can be in the space. So they can say, that person, I resonate with them. I understand how their pathway, and I see myself doing what they're doing as a competitor, as a caster, as a production person, as a game designer, As a team owner, I can aspire to that because I see somebody like me that has done it and is in that position. How do we celebrate that more? How do we make it more accessible? But how do we just bring in more people to what esports is? I think you've got to make it digestible. Esports is hard to watch for a lot of people. It is chaos. It is like the Blair Witch effect on steroids. Because it's the first person view of this camera moving around like this, that if my parents tried to watch it, they're gonna be like, absolutely not, never gonna happen. I can't tell what's going on. I get a headache watching it. So from even a production standpoint, through Twitch and YouTube in particular, how do we make this easier for people to watch and digest and consume so that they will come back and watch it more often, pass it on to their kids, pass it to their friends, to get them to also watch it, which brings in more people. Now you've got that bigger audience. It's more inclusive. It's more diverse just because you're reaching such a different demographic across kind of more stratified for different people. So we've got to celebrate the people that are not white or Asian males in the esports space in particular. We've got to embrace the 45% of gamers that are out there that are women in the space, and to bring them into the space on a more competitive standpoint. And then we've got to just reach the mass audience through production, through games that we do, through competition. We've got to get our PCs and consoles into YMCAs and community centers to make sure people that can't afford these really expensive machines have those same opportunities that people that can't afford have, right? So how do we get them into our spaces that maybe have financial difficulties? How do we find grant opportunities and scholarship opportunities to make sure everybody is more equitable and has that chance to succeed in this space as much as possible?
Yeah, I mean, do you feel that for esport to grow and even maybe become more successful would be to expand more into maybe the traditional mainstream media beyond just streaming, perhaps to bring in more viewers that may not be aware of the esport community?
Absolutely. I think, but again, it comes out of partnership. Like the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, there is a two-way street. That is a symbiotic relationship with video games and the Olympics, because the Olympics it's hard to draw those 13 to 20-year-olds to watch the pentathlon. But watching the Olympics, you're not going to get a huge audience of those people, but video games do get that audience of people. So let's put those two things together. Now you're bringing in a mass audience outside of gamers for video games, but you're bringing in that younger generation, younger demographic to just be engaged with what the Olympics is and can be. So yeah, I think partnering with traditional sports, especially on the international side, is a huge way to bring people in.
Let's get a little bit more insight into you. What is your favorite game to play, or perhaps if you were to compete in esports, what would be the game you would pick? Maybe one or two. I know that's a tough question.
Oh my gosh! I mean, yeah, it's tough. If I had to pick one right now, it would probably be Overwatch. That's just because that's the game I played the most when I was still playing those games that were competitive. I don't play them competitively anymore. I'm so bad at them. I wish Halo was still around at a higher level. It's still around in some capacity, but that was my jam growing up. So I think Overwatch is the one that I pay attention to the most, just because I played it more. I like watching Rocket League. I think it's really fascinating to watch because it's easy to understand and easy to watch. But I am god awful at that game. I'm so bad at it. So I think Overwatch would be the one I pick and that I've played most recently. But the competitive games I play right now are like Age of Empires and MLB The Show. And I don't play them competitively. I play them only against myself or the computer, because these kids online are far better than me, and I don't want to get absolutely owned. I want to just have an enjoyable experience.
And you've been doing this for a while now, and maybe give us a memorable moment, maybe a match or competition that you could share with us that really struck a chord with you. Is there something in this esport industry that really has moved you?
I always go back to the same one, and it's because it's by far the most impactful for me. So in my previous institution, Shenandoah University in Winchester, Virginia, at the time we had a Madden player. So Madden was relatively popular around the country. There were still organizations and competitions structured for it, not as popular now as it was, but we had this incredibly good Madden player, and he was in the top probably 1 percentile, if not percentages of percentile around the country. And we made it to the national championship. And I was like, great, we're in the national championship. We got a chance to get a ring, we get a banner, get a trophy. And we're playing against a school called Boise State. Obviously a big school. People know about them. They've had an exemplar program in collegiate esports for years and years and years, still used as a gold standard. So I'm like, ooh, playing in a gold standard match against a gold standard competition against a team I like to talk smack against anyway. So I was like, this is it. I love this. And so we were watching this match in our facility in Virginia, And as we're watching, this player's like grooving. It's a best of 3 series. He won the first match. And we're like, great, we're going to win. All we need is one more. Gets down really big in the second match. And so it's like, oh, okay, we'll lose it, but we'll win the third one. Ends up coming back in the second match to get within a touchdown, makes a massive interception, scores a touchdown. And we're like, okay, he could either go for 1 and go to overtime, or we can just end it right now and go for 2. And we were screaming and chanting. He went for 2 and didn't get it. Went to match 3. I'll get there in a second. But I was jumping around in that arena like I would in a traditional sports venue. It's like I was watching, I went to University of Georgia. I'm a massive college football fan. And so it was like I was watching the Georgia football team play in a national championship, which I've also done in that arena because esports arenas are really cool to watch sports in. And so I've run around that space and cheered for Georgia and Stetson Bennett to score touchdowns and beat Alabama or beat TCU. I've watched it. Watching this event, I was screaming and running, and I didn't even realize it. I was like, whoa. This is as excited as I would get for my favorite traditional sport, for an esport event, for somebody that's playing a Madden video game against somebody in Idaho right now because of how intense and how close it was. That was what told me, like, I had studied esports and played esports, but that was the moment I was like, there is a fan and spectator experience to this that you would get from traditional sports. That was the moment. We ended up losing in game 3. We were up, last second touchdown. Boise scored on a slant over the middle to score a touchdown, literally the last play of the game to win the national championship. So we didn't get the championship. The director over there still wears the ring around me to make sure he knows and understands that about 7 years ago, they beat us in a national championship. So we're still missing that for Madden. We won a different game, national championship, but that moment was definitely the one that sticks out to me.
My last question is really maybe an all-encompassing one. If you had to tell someone who had no idea what esport is and maybe doesn't understand the culture of esport, what would you tell them?
I would tell them to come to an event. I mean, you can talk all day long. You can show pictures, show videos. You can watch things online. Like, yeah, I could say, hey, go to our Twitch stream, go to our YouTube stream, and go check out the matches that we have and the productions we do, which are first class, and they're student run and student produced because students are getting the experience. They're amazing. Follow our social media, graphic design. Students do that. It's great. It's awesome. You can see what esports looks like on a college campus. You don't know what it really is like until you go to an event, go to an arena, go watch these people compete at a very high level. Try to play the game a little bit too, to see how good they actually are. This is like that thing, like I would love in the Olympics to see like an average Joe do the same thing these Olympians are doing and try to compare the two to show them how good Michael Phelps or Katie Ledecky actually is at swimming. You get a sense of that, but you don't know what esports is until you experience it. Go to an event, talk to the players, talk to the students about the impact it has, watch what's going on, understand the skill level that they have and the impact it has on their student engagement, their fan engagement, their community building, the education that they're getting, and career opportunities that they have. So my biggest piece of advice is go find a venue, go to an esports event, watch it online, sure, listen to it, talk about it, play it, but go to an actual event as a spectator and as a fan and see what that feeling is that you have. You will want to go back to more of them. It's an incredible experience.
Do you have any upcoming events that you can share with our listeners? Maybe something coming up in the near future for Syracuse University esports?
Absolutely. Well, I will say that our regular season matches are Monday through Friday at 8 o'clock. That will be going up until really about the middle of March, until our championship in Las Vegas. If you can come to Las Vegas, come to the HyperX Arena, April 5th and 6th. That would be amazing. But other than that, we will be hosting events here on campus. We have a Counter-Strike event coming up on February 12th and 13th. We'll have a Counter-Strike event here on campus with other schools around the country. And then here on campus, we're looking at a date we're looking at early summer that we will be hosting a high school event here on our campus. But then in the fall, we'll have a big convention on campus for competition, for case studies, for panels, for speaking engagements, just to show off our space. So watch us online, watch us on YouTube, watch us on Twitch. For those regular season matches. If you can make it to Vegas, we'd love to have a fan base in Vegas and blow everybody else away. And then just follow our social media, especially Twitter and Instagram, Qs_esports, for that updated schedule about events that we're having on campus.
Hey, I'm going to put all the Syracuse University esport information into the show notes. Joey, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me about the esports program at SU and the esports world in general. And I'm excited to see what's ahead for you and the Syracuse University eSport teams. Thank you so much for being with me. I really appreciate it. I want to thank Joey Gawrysiak again for joining me on the podcast. Now, you can connect with us many ways. We're on Instagram. We're on Blue Sky. You can watch videos of our podcast on YouTube. Listen to the podcast on any of your favorite podcasting services. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Audible. And don't forget, click on subscribe so you'll never miss an upcoming episode. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.